Okay, I want to take a look now at some of Vu's animation abilities, which are somewhat hidden and not always entirely visible. So we're going to go ahead and load in a sphere now, and start out with that. And we're going to create a small animation path. So I'm going to go up to Animation up here, and Display Timeline, where you can hit F11 on the keyboard. And we are going to go and scroll up to about 5 seconds. And I'm going to grab up in the top view, the sphere, just drag it over a little, and then we can right mouse click to move our view over. And if we want to make sure this is going perfectly straight, we could hold down the Shift key and move that over, or we can go up to our numeric for position and move it on the X and not move it on the Z or the Y at all. Now we just have a pretty straightforward animation, just our sphere moving across. And I'm going to go back to frame 0 just by clicking this second inside button here, and just so we can rotate around our camera so we can see the entire duration of the animation. Now what we also have is our animation properties. So if we go to this lower left button here, and go ahead and click on that, it's going to bring up our animation properties. And as you can see, we have position, orientation, size, twist, pivot, and material. And since we are only animating our position, we only have a time slider for the position. If we come all the way to the right here, we're going to notice we have a small little picture of sort of a small linear graph, which is our time spline. So if we double click on that, it's going to give us the ability to select different time splines that we can use, which will affect our animation and exactly how it is animated and its speed of where it moves during the certain parts of time. Now what you can also do is create your own. If we push the X on this to cancel out, I'm going to right mouse click on that and go to Edit Time Spline, which is going to sort of bring up a little graph editor. And if we scrub through the timeline down here, you'll see our line moving across, and we also have a crosshair, which is staying the center point of exactly where the linearness is. So it's staying in the center throughout the whole animation, showing exactly what would be linear. And what we have is this highest point of the white right here, which we can also edit, is as far as it's going to go. If we go to the end of the animation, as you can see, our little crosshair went all the way up to the top, and we're at our top part in the end of the animation, which means this is our farthest point that it will be moving. And of course down here is our lowest point, which is our beginning of our animation. And then we go up. So up and down is pretty much just the duration or the distance of where I'll be traveling, which we've set by creating keyframes. And then of course on the bottom line here is our actual seconds in the animation. So what we could do if we wanted to not have to create keyframes for things, and that's pretty much what this is mostly for, is so that you don't have to create keyframes for certain parts of animation. So if we even wanted to edit this, and it would, let's say we were in a complicated scene and it'd be difficult for us to edit the object in the keyframe, although it probably wouldn't be, we could go in and actually move this in about center way, this last point right here, and what that will do is only make the animation go up till the center of that path, because we have it in the center right here. We drag it all the way up to the top, it goes to the end. If we drag it all the way to the bottom, there's no movement at all, and it will stay exactly the same. And as you can see, our crosshair is still traveling exactly where the linear spline should be. And we can go back and edit this, and we can add key points if we want to change it within the animation. Go ahead and click anywhere in the screen and click New Key Point, and it will create a key point wherever it is you clicked. And now, as you notice, we have moved up, and what we could have it do is reach that part of the animation much quicker now, or at least the end of that path. And we could also make it so it doesn't move up until a certain point. Now a lot of this is pretty simple, and you might not use it for these specific actions because you could easily just keyframe this, but if you have something a little more complex, like we could go in and click somewhere else and add a new key point, and we could bring it down. And now we have it going up part way, and then coming back, and then going all the way to the end. And this way, by creating a graph, it's much easier to create this animation than it is for us to actually go in and create several keyframes for that, because that would be one keyframe for the beginning, and then another keyframe, and another, and we'd end up with 4 keyframes. And instead, we just have our 2 keyframes, one for the beginning of the animation and one for the end. Now, what you can also do if you want this a little more nonlinear, so we have more of a curvature throughout the whole animation, we can go ahead and select this first button up here, and that will automatically give us a nice curve. And you will see that our animation is sort of blending more nicely into these new positions, and it doesn't just go to one point and start up in the next, and it's not as rigid. We can also select these points and edit the spline to raise them up and curve them if we want. So now, even by doing this, we've created several different keyframes, where normally we'd have one keyframe down here, another up here, one down here, up here, down here, and up here. And instead, we just have these two, which is creating what is sort of the impression of several keyframes. And we also have the ability to do, if we click this third button up here, it'll give us our grid. So if we really want to work very precisely, we could use the grid. And we also have a grid snap, which is our last button, which will allow us to snap our points to certain points in the grid. As you can see, it is snapping directly to those points. And we also have the ability to zoom in and out of this if we want to be a little more precise. And if you ever get to a point where you're zoomed out really far and you're moved away, and now at this point we can't really find that anymore, and it'd be a real pain to go in and zoom in and out and find it, you can click this last button, and that will go ahead and frame it back into view. So that will reset any zooming that you've done, and you can go ahead and edit that. So now at this point right here, if we go through, we'll notice that our animation at this point will reach the farthest point, and down here it will pretty much go all the way back to the beginning, and then about 3/4 of the way, and then back about 1/3 of the way, and then all the way back. So if we're scrolling through, it goes all the way, and then almost back, about 2/3 of the way, and then back 1/3, and then all the way up to the end. So you can do a lot of different animation for movement for this, but you can also do this with sizing and squishing and twisting and other different aspects. So I'm going to cancel this, which is going to close out that spline entirely. And I want to go to Animation, Destroy Object Animation. And what this is going to do is just remove our animation entirely from that object. And we're going to start out with something new here. And I want to show you the sizing feature that we can do with that. We're going to create another 5-second animation. And now I'm going to, from the numeric values, third button up here, and go to the middle button, or sorry, the middle button up here, and the middle button down here, so that's the second up here, not the third. And we can grab from the center. As you can see, now we have all axes selected, because if you notice they highlight, and they'll light up depending on which axis you have selected. So I'm going to select from the center so that we have the X, Y, and the Z all selected, and go ahead and scale that up to be a bit bigger. And now as we scroll through, it created an animation where we have it small at frame 0, and after 5 seconds, it'll get sort of large. Now we can also edit our time spline for that. And if you notice too, we also have that slider for our size showing up here. And now I'm going to right mouse click and go to Edit Time Spline. And now, the way this is set up, we have our highest point right here is the largest size this object is going to reach, and the lowest point is back to where the smallest point is going to reach, which we set by creating those keyframes. So if I move this down, you'll notice that we have no sizing. So it's just like before with the position, and if we bring it all the way up, then we can determine that sizing. So we can go in, click right here, click new key point, click in here, new key point, over here, new key point, show the grid if we want to, turn on the curves if we want, and change that up a bit. So now if we watch our animation now, see that's going up, sizing, it comes down just a little and then back up to pretty much the highest point, and then all the way down to the lowest point of its size, and then the highest, where it's nicely blending into that large size. So like I said, you can do this with any of the animation properties down here that you have. Anything so far, you can do it with materials, where you could blend back and forth between certain materials. You could do it with your twist and your pivot and orientation, and so your orientation would be your rotation. So if we set it to rotate 360 degrees, we can go ahead and set a time spline for that, so we don't have to create extra keyframes if we wanted to only edit halfway and then come back and then go back around a couple of times. So we can edit that all in these time splines. And what we also can do is save those time splines. If we right mouse click, we can click Save Time Spline. And then we'll be able to actually load it in to when you double click on that and you get your chooser. You'll be able to select that filter if you load it in. So that way you can create your own. And that's a good way to set up any type of spline you're working on. You could just do a default scene where you create your own custom splines that you want to have if you want to have a little collection of your own. And what they will also do is stretch out to fit any duration of any animation and any size or any position that you have, and they will automatically stretch to fit as needed. So you don't have to worry about if you only have, in this case, let's say this is a 5-second animation. If we loaded this on a 2-second animation, it would still display the same. It would squish this down to 2 seconds, and we wouldn't have to worry about it coming in about right there and cutting off. So they will size themselves directly to whatever it is you're using. So you can go ahead and save those splines and reuse them if you want to. And you can also copy these and paste these onto either other objects. So if we take another sphere, actually I'm going to undo that, so we don't want to create an animation for it. Go back to frame 0, and we're going to move it over here. Or actually, we'll delete that sphere, and we'll use a different object to show that you can really use it for different objects as well. And we'll put that box right there. And now as we're scrubbing through, we have nothing for the box. But if I go to this size, and I'm going to actually, since we don't really have anything selected and we did cancel out of that, I'm just going to grab one of these random ones. I'll just grab this strange number 2 and click OK. And you can see a preview of that spline in there as well. Now if we scroll down, or expand our sphere, or unexpand it, you'll notice that we don't have anything for our box. It's not showing up, but that's because there's no keyframe set for it. If we go all the way to the end of the animation, we can add a keyframe. So if we right mouse click on this, we could add a position keyframe, orientation, or we can add a keyframe to all properties, which is what I'm going to do. And then that shows up in our properties down here. And if we scrub through, we still don't have anything going on with that box because there's no animation set to it. But I'm going to go to that sphere, and I'm going to right mouse click, go to copy, and then expand that cube. And now as you can see, we have animation set up for our position, our orientation, our size, twist. But if we want to set our size, we could go right here to this middle, to this third one, right mouse click, and paste time spline. And now it is added and copied over, which we also have not set a specific value on it. So if we go ahead to this last frame now, and we size that up to the biggest point that we want, we'll notice that we have a variation. So with these splines, you do have to set up the animation, especially with size. You have to make sure you size it to the highest point that you want. We could also go ahead and undo. Sorry. Go ahead and size that up even higher if we wanted, and then we still get that same animation. As you can see, they are linked up, and we have them going back and forth about the same. So these splines can be applied to anything, actually. We can use them for position if we wanted to, use them for size, and they work all the way across the board. Okay, and another thing I want to show you really quick is actually how to set the amount of keyframes that you have per second, or the amount of frames per second, not exactly keyframes. By default, it is 25 frames per second, and unless you've done an animation before, you wouldn't have noticed exactly how to change those keyframes, because actually you have to go to render an animation before you can set the keyframe. So if we go to animation right now, and we go to render animation, it's going to bring up our animation render options, which will be the ability to set our render quality and things like that. But what we're really looking at is down here at our frame rate. default is normally set to 25, and it also gives you an idea what those are used for. That is for PAL resolution of television, 30 frames a second is NTSC, and 24 is film. And then when we go beyond or below that, we just have other variable frame rates. But we're going to set this to 30 because I'm working with NTSC video mostly, or 24 frames per second with film. But set it for whatever your preference is. You could also go in and select other and select a random amount. We could select 23 if we wanted to. So it really depends on your preferences of what it is you're working with. If you're working in America or a few other countries that use NTSC, you'll select that. And if you're in one of the countries that uses PAL, you of course select that. And then if you're working on film, it's 24 frames per second all across the world. So we're going to select 30 frames per second and click OK. And that way we just have our setting, our frames, and we're not changing anything, and we're not worrying about actually rendering it. So I'm going to create a new scene now and actually show you a few of the other features we have available. File, New, and I'm just going to select a random sky and click OK, and I'm not going to save. Now Vue has a lot of built-in animation features which will actually create animations for you. And I'm going to go ahead and just load in this cube really quick and go to this last panel. If you ever noticed our motion right here, and you click on it, you can have a standard and standard motion. So that would be pretty much what we're using normally if you're just creating keyframes on your own. You could also do smoothed, which will smooth that out and make your splines, your time splines, a little more curved and a little less linear. You also have look ahead, airplane, helicopter, and these are all different presets for what it is exactly that you're animating, or what it is similar that you're animating. And we also have synchronized on the bottom, which is used to load in synchronized data from other software programs. And actually there is a plugin that comes on the Vue CD, which you can load into Maya or XSI or Lightwave and actually export your camera motion, and Vue will automatically synchronize camera motion and lighting motion, which you can apply to objects and things like that. I'm going to select not animated right now because I don't want to use this cube for animation. And I'm going to actually load in one of the objects that came with Vue, just to give you a little better idea what I'm talking about here. I'm going to select this button over here on the left to load in an object. And I'm going to go to Vehicles, Airplanes, and just select this airplane right here. And any of the airplanes will work, or if you have your own custom airplanes, you could load that in too. And we're going to create an airplane animation. And actually, we can do this automatically, which is one of the nice things about Vue. I'm going to position our viewport, and I'm going to animation display timeline. And another thing we can also do down here is if you right mouse click on this timeline, you'll have the ability to drag through and get to some of the higher frames. Now if you're working with a very long animation, that could be a real pain having to scrub through all of that. So what you can actually do is hold down the control key, right mouse click, and drag it and squish it down. So then we can have several minutes if we wanted to, or even hours in that animation. So now we have 100 seconds, 200 seconds, and we could go ahead and expand that back to where we were before. And at this point, I'm going to want to actually bring that back, just because we went a little too far out, and bring that to where we were. And then we can zoom in and move that over. Okay, I want to set this for we'll just do a 10-second, or yeah, we'll do a 10-second animation. We'll just bring that in to 10, and we can come over here and edit if we want, or type in the whole thing if we needed to, and just do 10 seconds. And you can go and type those values however you need to. And I'm just going to select this airplane and move it across the screen. And now we just have a simple animation. But I want to go in the center now and actually pull it off to the side, like if the plane was turning. Now if you notice the way our animation is set up, it's not behaving like an airplane would. Well, actually what we can do is just go to Motion up here and select Airplane. And as you notice, the animation automatically adjusts. And because of our the fact that we have 10 seconds here, I'm going to position our camera so we can see this a little bit better, along that curve especially. You notice it does start to bank slightly, and that's mostly because it is taking 10 seconds for it to get from here to here. But if we came in a little bit closer and pulled that off to the side, you'll notice there is a lot more of a bank on that airplane. And this is behaving kind of weirdly because I have it not really set up like a actual airplane would move. So actually, if I go to animation, and I'm just going to destroy that, and we're going to start out with something a little bit better, and actually go into 3 seconds and create a 3-second animation, and that will actually give us a little more control, and actually we can see what's going on a little bit better. And I'll go in and zoom that in so we can have that stretched out a little more, just by holding the control key and right mouse clicking and then pulling that upward. And now if we create a key about in the center and drag it off to the side, set that back to airplane, you notice we have more of a bank here, and that's because it's a shorter animation, and if it actually was banking that quickly, it would tilt as it is. So with the ability to automatically tilt that without having to go in and, even though we had to create a keyframe for the motion for over there, we didn't have to create keyframes for the actual tilt and go into our orientation and change that, which we'd normally have to do right here and either pitch it or set the yaw a little higher. What we can also do is change this for anything. If we had a helicopter, we could of course change this to helicopter. And you'll be able to see this behave just a little bit differently, where we have kind of the tail end sticking out just a little bit more, as a helicopter would if it was moving along that path, and it doesn't bank nearly as much as an airplane would. We also have missile, so if you wanted to behave like a missile, or a motorbike, pedestrian, or any of these. We also have stuff for speedboat, and it's just preset animations for these specific traits. But what we also have the ability to do is have Voo pretty much set everything up for us. I'm going to go back and destroy this object animation. And as you can see, we are curved a little and actually created a keyframe. So I have to destroy the animation again, go back to frame 0. And now I want to go select animation. And now normally, if you go to display timeline, your animation wizard might automatically come up, and by default it does. So if you notice this screen right here, I have mine checked off so that it doesn't show up every single time I open the timeline. But if you want to leave this open, or you can just come up to animation and select the animation setup wizard, click next, and this will automatically set up our objects all within this dialog. So I'm going to select airplane and go to next, and then we can set our axis depending on which direction we want it to be facing, and whether or not we want the animation just to go once, or we could repeat it. We could also loop it. And I'm going to go, we could also have constant velocity down here, or ease in and ease out. And they all have descriptions for exactly what they do, so I'm not really going to go into that too much. I'll just go to next, and we also have the ability to spin this if we wanted to. And as you can see, our airplane is spinning, so we could add a little more animation to that. Let's say that airplane was crashing. We could also turn on vibration, so it's vibrating as it's about to crash, or if we had something like that, or if there was turbulence. And we could also set our vibration resolution over time with a filter, in the exact same way we set up our other filters. I'm going to turn off spin right now because we just want that basic animation, and we're just pretty much recreating what we just did before. I'm going to go back to next, and now we can set up our object path. Now this is our starting point for that airplane. And if I go and click over here, that's going to create the end of our animation. We have the ability to select edit, and we can edit that waypoint if we wanted to. Or we could insert new ones and go back and edit those if we needed to. And then if you need to delete them, you can just select delete and delete those. But I'm going to go back and edit them and have this animation automatically created. And now this is not dependent on time at all, and we're actually going to set that up after we click next. So you can go ahead and set up whatever you want your animation to be and figure out your timing later. So I'm going to click next now, and now on the bottom we have the ability to set how many seconds we want this animation to be. I'm going to bring it up to 4 seconds and click Next. And it's giving us a preview of what our airplane looks like. And this is actually traveling on the wrong axis, which is why it's slightly off, or more than slightly actually. So what we can do is just go back and select a different axis, and go back to Next, all the way to the end, and now as you can see our airplane is going backwards. So you have to make sure you set your correct axis, and we had that. Put that on the positive X, and now our airplane is flying correctly, and we have a nice little preview here. And this preview is based on where our camera is located, so you cannot modify the camera viewport at all, or the preview window at all. We're going to click Next, and then we're done. We can click Finish, and our animation will automatically load into View and into the main screen. So we have that nice little animation set up, and you can do that with any of your animations for anything, whether it's an airplane or a vehicle. And actually, vehicles are really neat, what we can do for the animation of that, and I'm actually going to show you that right now. So I'm going to go to File, New, for a new scene, and I'll just select the clear spring, which is pretty much the default sky, and click OK. We're not going to save it. And now the first thing I want to do is actually load in a standard terrain. So I'm just going to click this button right here for our standard terrain, and I want to size this up just a bit. Just make it a little bit of a bigger terrain, so we don't have it so small that it's not realistic, because we will be loading in an object and we want it to be equal. I also want to drop that, and it's not allowing me to drop it because it's might even be below that level. I'm going to bring it down just a little bit, maybe just below that ground plane, because I just want to create some bumps and stuff so you can really see our vehicle motion. Double click on our terrain, and I want to use the dig function to lower it down. And what we could also do if we wanted better resolution on this is we could crank it up to 512 by 512, and that'll give us a little bit better. And I just want to create some humps. I'm not really worrying about real aesthetics right now. And I'm going to click OK. So now we have this real basic terrain, just some bumps in the ground, and I'll just bring that down just a little bit more, just so we have a few humps and nothing major. And now what I want to do is come in, and maybe I'll raise that up just a little bit more, and I'm going to load another object in. So left mouse click on that, and I'm going to select the grounded vehicles, and I'm going to select the tank and click OK. Now we want to zoom out in our viewports here, and we're going to set up an animation for this tank. And now we could do this the same way we just did before, using that animation wizard that we had, by going up to animation, selecting the animation wizard, or we do it manually like we did before. And I'm going to go back, and I want to set, we're still at frame 0 because we haven't displayed the timeline and we really haven't done anything yet. I just want to bring us outside of this little terrain, and I'm going to go to animation, display timeline, and now I want to figure out exactly how long I want this animation to be. Well, let's say we want to have it, we'll just do 10 seconds. Seems to be a good number. And what I want to do is bring our tank over to here. So in 10 seconds, our tank will make it over here. Now, we want it to, of course, go along this terrain, and we don't want it going directly through. So what we're going to do is select Motion, Automobile. And if you notice too, our tank is facing the wrong direction, so we want to make sure that we're facing the correct direction, which is the positive Y in this case. And as you can see, our tank is moving across that terrain. But what you'll also notice is it is levitated off the ground, because once you apply that motion, it is wherever it's fixed to. So you're going to want to drop the object before you go ahead and do anything. So if I select this back to not animated, which is going to change everything, we send it back to standard, we still have lost all of our keyframes. So make sure you have, when you have your animation, that you don't want to select not animated, because we'll remove everything. We're not going to make any major changes right now, so that's not really a big deal. We're going to select our tank, and we're going to select this bottom button right here to drop our object, which is going to position it so it's directly on our terrain, or on our ground plane actually. And I want to position our camera now, and just move it in a little so we can see what's going on with this tank and with the terrain, and see it a little bit better, get a better preview. We're going to go back to our 10 seconds, and I'm going to grab our tank and move it across, and then select motion and go back to automobile, and we'll set this back on the positive Y. And as you can see, our path is drawn once again, and if we scrub through our animation, you'll actually see the tank going over the terrain. And this works with any object. You could do this with balls if you wanted to, or you could do it with boxes, or any of the primitive shapes, any objects that you create at all, to have them moving over any one of the objects, and it will automatically push the object down and create keyframes for it automatically, depending on the geometry of what it is that it's moving over. Depending whether or not you're up in the air or not, definitely if it's a ground vehicle, you're going to want to, or if you have the automobile selected, it will be a ground vehicle, and you're not going to have it up in the air. Things like jumps and things like that, of course you won't be able to really work into this, just because it won't be able to calculate that, although you could go in and edit your keyframes later and add additions to them. There's another thing too. We had more features in our animation wizard, and if we ever want to get back to those features, we can go ahead and select this last button down here, which is going to bring up our animation toolbox, which is pretty much exactly the same settings that we had in our animation wizard. So if we still wanted to add spin, we could do that, or vibration, and you don't necessarily have to use the animation wizard to get these options, because we can go to our animation toolbox and get the exact same things we had before. We're chose them in a nice little setup here. What we also can do is display a ribbon. So we're going to select show as ribbon, and you'll see this showing up in our animation already, and that is displaying our path as a ribbon. There's also this middle button right here, so if you don't want to go all the way to the toolbox for that, you just select this middle button, and that will display our ribbon on and off. I'm going to go back to frame 0 so we can move our camera in without creating any animation keyframes. And if you notice, we have these lines moving across in the ribbon, and actually each one of those lines stands for every 2 frames. So once it reaches one of those lines, it means 2 frames has passed. So it's a really good way of determining exactly where your animation is at, and how many frames your tank is into that animation, or whatever object. In this case it's a tank, but depending on what you're animating, it might not necessarily be that. Ribbon also lets you know it's a really good tool, especially if you're working on filters, because if we expand this now, we're going to go to our position filter, or right mouse click, and we're going to edit that time spline, or time splines, sorry, not filters, and we can actually edit that at this point. And I'm going to select right here and click new key point, and on the side over here and click new key point, and as we make changes, you'll be able to see our tank moving, but you can also see the ribbon changing and how far away each one of those lines is. So we can see it's real tight down here, and it's real far away right there. And we can change that as much as we want, and now they're very far away. So it's a real good guide if you're going to be editing your time splines. I'll go ahead and close that out. And like I said, this works with any object you want to use. We could, of course, use this for a ball and create a little bit of spin on it, as if the ball was rolling over this terrain, and you can get some really neat effects this way. And you'll also notice too that sometimes our objects will go through our terrains just a little, or whatever objects they're going through, and that's all dependent on the shape of the object and really how complex the objects are that it's going over. So you really have to just kind of watch what you're doing there, because as you can see, we're going straight down right there, and we have almost the front part of our object going through that ground plane, and that's because we have a very high amount right here. So you just want to make sure you don't have too many cliffs or things like that when you're doing an animation like this. Another thing too is you can also edit your terrains and still have your animation performing correctly. So if we go to select our terrain right now and double click on it, and let's say we want to edit it and we want to raise it up a bit, and we're just gonna make little changes here and there. I want to make sure I'm keeping the ends, of course, touching the ground so that we don't have a sharp cutoff. I'm going to click OK. And now you can see our terrain has changed drastically. But if we select our tank, we'll notice that it's actually recalculated. If we go ahead and actually, we've created a little bit too much, and it's cutting off. And that does happen if you have too much of an area going on, and it really doesn't want to calculate all that, because sometimes it's just not realistic. We'll go ahead and we'll dig that back down, just so it's not as rough. But we are making terrain changes, which you can do at any point throughout the animation, and it will recalculate your frames. So we're changing it right now, and I'm going to click OK. We'll select our tank again, and of course, now you'll see that it's perfectly straight because we don't have any bumps in there. So it's going perfectly straight across the frame. What we can also do is grab our terrain and raise it up a bit. And once we raise it up and grab our tank, now you see that hump is in there. So if we go and zoom in, you can see that it will conform to the new section of the terrain. So it is constantly reevaluating itself. So you don't have to worry about making changes to your scene and having to go back and reanimate that object. It will automatically do it for you. So whether you're using the animation wizard, the animation toolbox, or just going in and doing it manually, you can get some really neat effects for specific objects. And like I said, if you go up to the motion options here, you'll just see all the different types, and for each different type of animation that you're doing. And also, keep in mind, look ahead. If you select look ahead, what it'll do is cause your animation to be constantly on its path. So it'll be rotating and going constantly on its path, and there'll be no tilting or banking or anything like that. So you can use look ahead if you just want it to constrain to that curve, or if you want to go and maybe go a little bit beyond exactly what's Vu's automatically doing for you, because sometimes you might want to exaggerate it a little bit. And that's the beauty of 3D, is you can go in and exaggerate things as much as you want. And a lot of the time, people can't tell it's not real.